Switch over here to two breakout stars, two emerging wide receivers in Michael Gallup and Calvin Ridley. Gallup finished as the wide receiver 22 in PPR leagues. Calvin Ridley as the wide receiver 27, so pretty similar there. Alex, I'll have you go ahead and make your case first. Who do you like out of these two guys?
Yeah, I really like Calvin Ridley a lot. Again, these are both great guys to look at for 2020. We saw them both take another really strong step forward in 2019. But to me, it's Calvin Ridley. He's put together two awesome seasons in the NFL already. He was a first-round pick back in 2018. You have to respect that draft capital. And last season, he was wide receiver 18 in terms of points per game. So he's already, a mid-wide receiver too. And that's as the second receiver on his own team. And with the Falcons, there's just a lot of stability within that team. You know that Julio Jones is going to be back. You know Calvin Ridley is going to be back. You know Matt Ryan's going to be the quarterback. So not a lot is changing. Where right now with the Cowboys, there's a lot up in the air. Is Amari Cooper going to be there? Is Dak going to get the long-term deal? Some things like that. And once that shakes out, those concerns go away. But there is a new head coach in Mike McCarthy, so you just have to wonder how that's going to work out as well. So again, going back to Calvin Ridley, 7 targets a game in 2019. And the really interesting thing that I want to look at is what Calvin Ridley was able to do after the Falcons traded Mohamed Sanu. He was having a fine season before Sanu was traded to the Patriots, but when Sanu got traded, he played 4 games with Matt Ryan for the rest of the 2019 season. And in those 4 games, Calvin Ridley averaged 21.5 PPR points per game. Just for some context, only one player in the NFL averaged more than 21.5 PPR points a game, and that was Michael Thomas. So we saw the upside with that offense when Matt Ryan is looking exclusively at Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. And I know Austin Hooper was a bit banged up in there as well, but this is an offense that can support 2 really elite wide receivers. And Ridley's emergence is only going to help Julio Jones, and Julio Jones drawing coverage is only going to help Calvin Ridley. And a really interesting stat that Football Outsiders puts together is called the DVOA, and that stands for the defense adjusted value over average. And I know that's a mouthful, but basically what that means is this metric, it measures the value per play that a receiver gives you over an average wide receiver. So after calculating every snap in 2019, they gave Calvin Ridley the number 2 DVOA for the entire season, behind only Chris Godwin. So what's that saying is on when he was targeted, on when he made catches, on when he was just running routes, he was the number 2 as far as value over average, according to this statistic. So I know it's just one statistic that Football Outsiders probably made up, but it's really interesting to see that this guy is he's doing the right things. Like, he is putting himself in good situations. He's running strong routes. He's making plays when he's thrown to. He's not dropping the ball. He's making yards after catch. He's scoring touchdowns, things like that. So it just tells you that stats don't always tell the whole story. And luckily with Calvin Ridley, we get a really strong story from the stats, but we also get a really strong story from just his ability as a wide receiver. So heading into 2020, I think that Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones could be the next Mike Evans, Chris Godwin type situation where maybe they go back and forth week to week on who's going to have the massive blow-up week, but this offense can definitely support both as elite wide receiver ones in fantasy football.
There's some hot takes baked in there. I don't necessarily disagree. I do love Calvin Ridley, but let me throw some points out there as to why I'm way more hyped up about Gallup as opposed to Ridley. Really the question for me comes down to the passing volume. I think there's going to be a lot of regression in that category for the Falcons. They passed more in 2019 than any other team in the NFL. So I feel like we've kind of seen Ridley's volume or ceiling, I should say, from a volume standpoint. He finished 35th amongst targets among all wide receivers. He was great in games without Sanu. Don't want to take anything away from him there, but if he's going to be the new Mohamed Sanu, I don't want him, right? Like, Sanu is a mediocre streamer. You never really knew when to start him. You could play him in some matchups, but there was still some question as to, is he going to be the guy this week? And I'm not drafting that by choice in my redraft leagues. While I do think there is going to be plenty of volume there, next year. The game scripts also helped, as part of that volume, right? The Falcons had a terrible defense. They had so many injuries on their defense. And so we see Matt Ryan coming out, slinging it with a crazy amount of attempts, giving the ball to everybody, right? We saw Russell Gage have some great games. We saw, that Austin Hooper, stretch there where he was putting up a touchdown a game, playing really, really well for them. So you take some of that into effect. I do think the volume may be a bit lower, but certainly with, some of those pieces, turnover at the running back position, potentially turnover at the tight end position with Hooper walking in free agency. I do think, Ridley will still make his hay and be a fine guy, but I'm really excited about this guy, Michael Gallup. I think he's going to be an absolute beast. He had, 1,100 receiving yards in 2019. He was 10th in yards per reception amongst all wide receivers at 16.8. He had 6 touchdowns this year and had the 23 most targets amongst all wide receivers. He's a major part of that Cowboys passing game. He's an explosive playmaker. And if you pair him with Amari Cooper, even better. If not, I actually love Michael Gallup even more if he has to become the de facto number 1 for the Cowboys with Cooper hitting the open market. Dak is coming off the best passing season of his career. I expect him to continue to play at the level that he has played. He's been a QB1 every single year, and now we're seeing him do it really all with his arm, not too much with his legs. And, yes, Gallup may have burned you, fantasy owners in the playoff stretch. He had a rough stretch of games there from like week 13 to the end of the year, but it's the Cowboys. We should have seen that coming, right? We know they're going to choke down the stretch and find a way to lose that NFC East title. But with the Cowboys letting Byron Jones and Michael Bennett potentially walk in free agency, I think their defense could take a step down, which will lead to better game scripts for Gallup. And Gallup's only 24 years old, so still plenty of time ahead of him. His prime years have yet to come. I'm really excited about what he can do, especially if that Cowboys offense continues to improve with some new coaching and things like that. Alex, what are your takes on Gallup?
Yeah, there's a lot to break down based on what you just said, but it's too bad that most fantasy leagues don't go into week 17, because I know you mentioned Gallup struggling down the stretch. He had that breakout 3-touchdown game in week 17 last season, but yeah, I think Gallup's a great player. I think there's a really good chance he could step up and have an even bigger 2020. But there's, to me, just too many question marks. We saw a similar type situation in Pittsburgh last year. Antonio Brown leaves, and we're thinking, Juju's going to be a star. And yeah, Ben Roethlisberger wasn't there. They were playing Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph, and we all know how that went. So maybe we'll give Juju the benefit of the doubt and give him one more season as far as stepping up and being that number 1. But with Michael Gallup, we just don't know. If Amari Cooper leaves, it's like, can Gallup be the guy when everyone's focused on him? And if Amari Cooper stays, then it's back to the situation of, can this offense support 2 really elite wide receivers? So, there's a chance that Gallup could be that, but to me, there's just a lot of question marks around it that we don't really have the answers to, and I don't want to take that kind of risk when I know I could get Calvin Ridley and know exactly what I'm getting. And then again, you did mention Dak Prescott taking a lot of strides forward as far as his passing volume goes in 2019. And there's 2 sides of the coin there, though. You could say, he passed for 4,900 yards and 30 touchdowns, and that's the new normal for Dak Prescott. Or you could compare it to the first 3 seasons of his career, where he beat his career high in passing yards by 1,000 yards. He beat his career high in passing touchdowns by 7. And you could say maybe this was a bit of an outlier, and Dak Prescott's not going to throw for 5,000 yards and 30 touchdowns every season. That's actually more like 3,500 yards and 25 touchdowns. So just from a volume standpoint, I don't know that this Cowboys offense is going to sustain that kind of passing volume again in 2020, especially when we know the kind of volume that Zeke eats up on the ground. So to me, again, I think Gallup's a great player. He was a 3rd-round pick in 2018. He's shown a lot. We did a highlight video on him, and I was able to break down a lot of his film, and wow, he is awesome, and he's a deep threat. He's a beast. He had that really high yards per catch number, so I think he brings a lot to the table. I think he's a strong wide receiver too in fantasy for 2020. But if you're giving me the choice between Gallup and Ridley, I think Ridley's floor is higher, and I think his ceiling is a little bit higher as well moving forward. So there's a lot there. I think the Cowboys offense could change a lot. Mike McCarthy, we all know what he did in Green Bay and how effective those offenses were through the air. So we'll see. We will see. But to me, Ridley is my guy here, and that's who I want in 2020.